Thank you for joining me on my first ever episode for the Yoga for Empaths podcast series. I'm super excited to have you here. And this is an invitation. This whole podcast series is an invitation to kick your shoes off and to take this moment for yourself to tune in. We're going to be doing a lot of different things related to reflection work, to meditation, to discussing topics that I find really inspiring and has also helped me on my journey as I learn about being an empath and a highly sensitive person, and also as I work with people who feel they are very sensitive in this area of life and the way they use their energy. And because this is my first episode, I'm also going to be introducing myself, and we're going to dive into the topic of what it means to be an empath and highly sensitive person. What's the definitions? And also, is there a difference? I know a lot of people ask me that question. What's the difference between an empath, highly sensitive person? Why does this label apply to this and not that, etc.? I get so many different confusing questions, and I just want to share my take on this, and you can reflect on whether it feels right for you. So, for starters, I want to share my journey, a quick version of my journey, because it started off in the mid 90s. In the mid 90s, specifically in 96. And I was going through a lot of different changes in my life. It sounds like lifetimes ago now that I say 96. It definitely was a totally different time than the one we're living in now. And through sheer accident, I had an experience of connecting with this book as my birthday present. And at the time, there wasn't any like information specifically about mind, body, soul or alternative stuff in the local library or the bookstore. So it was in the psychology department. And for some reason, I felt drawn towards going in that area and found this book by Shira Block where she was talking about essentially law of attraction. At that time, there wasn't even, I don't think, that term law of attraction because The Secret was not even out there. A lot of information to do with manifesting was not really something that you could look up very easily. And of course, the internet, I mean, compared to what it is now, didn't have as much information. So this was completely new to me, and it sparked off this beautiful soul seed experience where just from one book, which I read overnight, started my curiosity. It started my curiosity in seeing the world differently and also in the world of energy therapies. And I was quite used to being around people who were in healthcare, but I never knew the other side of healthcare, you know, the holistic side, the complementary therapy side, the things that now sometimes we even take for granted as being an option. Back then, at least where I was and in the space that I was, it wasn't really a thing. And it was very difficult to find information. And just by having that moment of connecting with this beautiful book, it started this huge journey of connecting with so many different people. Whether again it was law of attraction or not, I'm not sure, but I started connecting with people who inspired me, who opened my eyes to showing me that there's a different way of living life. There's actually, you know, there's a 5D and a 3D and everything in between. And the way we can connect with our energy is something so dynamic, and we can use it in so many ways. And through the next couple of years after that, into the early 2000s, I was doing a lot of this research on my own, connecting with people, and just being inspired on a personal level. And it was really after going through some health issues of my own that I decided to commit to actually making this part of my work. And this was again completely new to me because at the time it didn't seem like a quote unquote normal job to have. I certainly didn't know anyone that was making a living from it. I knew people who were interested in it, but they were working in different other fields in the workplace. So to go out and branch into this was pretty much an adventure in itself. I continued working with energy therapies, learning Reiki, energy healing, and then I studied in psychology and counseling. stress management counseling. And from there in 2004, I started I started seeing my first clients, which was so nerve wracking. I was so nervous. Um, it's one thing to have been doing it on a personal level, and it's another thing to be sharing it, as a profession, on a professional level. And I started off in London. So after having the first months, I think, of just getting through my nerves and getting through connecting with people and getting used to the routines of what it is to actually build a practice, a therapy practice, it started really becoming much more smoother. The flow started happening. I started working in different clinics. I opened my own clinic in 2010. And for the next couple of years after that, I was working in London Wall with a beautiful team of therapists. Some were working more on the medical side of things and psychologists, and then the other side of a spectrum, you can say it was more alternative and healing and crystals and that sort of thing. So it was a nice balance to have that full spectrum. And over the years, the one thing that I find really amazing was that I never chose a certain group to work with. I never decided that this was my niche or my group or my audience or my avatar. I think this shocked a lot of, business coaches who are friends who said, okay, how come you never chose a niche? What was that about? But in a way, I'm glad because I was working with people from so many walks of life. Um, Especially when I had my own practice and working with that team of therapists, we were right in the middle of the corporate environment. So these were bankers and lawyers and people you would maybe assume they were not interested in spirituality, but oh, was I so wrong, especially leading up to 2012. There was a huge shift in the city of London, and it's a very weird dynamic, which I can get into in future episodes, where you would have the corporate industry, the financing industry, the banking industry, the suited and booted crowd would be working during the day, and at night you would have the creatives that were out and the therapists who were working there in the city. So there was like this two beautiful, again, two sides of the spectrum working in one very concentrated area where the energy is very dynamic. And I never said to myself, I'm going to work with one type of person. But the one thing that was very clear to me was they all had something in common. Everyone I met, no matter if they were a banker or if they were a musician or if they were a student or, if they were working at home, the one thing that kind of brought them all together was this curiosity, the same curiosity I had in how to manage energy, how to manage their energy, especially as a sensitive person. And this was really the beginning of why I brought Yoga for Empaths together. I wanted to be more specific after years of working with so many different types of people and realizing that this was a common factor between them all. I wanted to provide a space and hold space for more information and practical tools in how to work with our energy, because it is quite a special thing. It is a special gift. I say gift, but I think everyone has the ability to tap into it. Which leads on to the topic that I want to get into, which is what is an empath and highly sensitive person, or how can you class yourself as that? And firstly, I have to say I'm not a big person when it comes to labels. Sometimes labels can be very helpful when it comes to looking up information, but at the same time, I know it can be very confusing, especially if you don't fit into a box. If you don't fit into that label box or this label box, or you feel confused, or, and I've met so many people like that who never felt that they fitted into the empath box or the highly sensitive box, yet they knew they were sensitive. So I'm quite open to the idea that there are many ways of defining this. And even looking up this topic online, you will see there are so many different references of how you can bring these two labels together, and on a personal level, how you can reflect on which label you feel connects to you personally. I like to use both of them together. Empaths and highly sensitive people, for me, are both pretty much the same sensory humans, being part of the sensory human community that we are, which I will talk more about in a minute. But if you're looking for books, specifically resources, the first thing I would say is to look at a book by Dr. Elaine Aron, and she talks about the highly sensitive person. That's one book that you can read. And there's also plenty of material by Dr. Judith Orloff, where she talks about being an empath. So these two sources have really helped me kind of put my thoughts and reflections together. And one thing specifically that caught my attention was what's known as the empathic spectrum by Dr. Judith Orloff. And in this spectrum, if you can imagine a spectrum from 0 to 10, 0 being the least sensitive, so a person who just doesn't feel any sensitivity, if that's possible, to 10 being the most sensitive person. And by using the spectrum, you can reflect on where you, on a personal level, process energy. Because it is all about energy. We are energy beings. We have our own energy system. If you can imagine in your mind the visualization of being a bubble where you have your own aura, you have your own chakra systems, and they're all interacting. And then this bubble that you're in is actually interacting with the world around you, the environment around you, through the people and places. And every day we exchange different energies. And there's so many factors involved in these exchanges, from our daily routines to our stress levels, to our own personal health, to what's going on around us. It is a practice in itself to be aware of how we exchange energy. And it is also a practice to reflect on where we fall on the spectrum. If we look at the spectrum towards the 0 sensitivity, we can see that narcissists, or people who process that energy that way, are more or less at the bottom of the spectrum, so they're the least sensitive. If we go further up, we can see around the mid-range that people who are naturally loving, empathic people would fall between the mid-range. And then further up, towards the higher end of sensitivity spectrum, we can see the highly sensitive person. And further up still, if we go towards the number 10, let's say the 10 level on the spectrum, 10 being the highest, we see the empath. So if you have that spectrum in your mind, you can ask yourself honestly, where do you feel you fall in this spectrum? And I actually noticed that in our lifetimes, we might actually change where we fall in this spectrum. For example, I know people who knew from a very young age, even through the first years of their life, that they were highly sensitive empaths. They were just extremely sensitive. And yet, for some reason, they had to shut it down, which is a whole topic in itself because of their environment, whether it was their family, this is the social norms, the way we were told to grow up or to be less sensitive. Then they found that their energy started getting less sensitive until later life. So that's one example. And then I've met people who never classed themselves as sensitive people until at one point in their life, maybe through health issues or through life awakenings, or even through Kundalini yoga awakenings, Kundalini energy awakenings. They found that their sensitivity suddenly skyrocketed towards a 10 on the spectrum. So at different points in our life, I'm a firm believer that we will connect to the spectrum differently. And you can choose how you want to label it, but it still comes down to a spectrum of how we exchange energy and how sensitive we are to energy, whether that's conscious or unconscious. If we look at the chakra system more specifically, I can name so many general observations about working with clients through the chakras. And I notice that people who tend to be more sensitive souls work with their upper chakras more than their lower chakras. So the struggle sometimes is to actually bring that energy from their upper chakras downwards. And vice versa, people who are less sensitive, people who you would say are more grounded, tend to be more in the lower chakras. It's not to say one is more better than the other. It's just the way we connect with our energy. And of course, on a personal level, we will be using our chakras more specifically. Some people will connect more to their heart chakra, for example, or some people might connect more to the solar plexus chakra. So it is extremely complex. And in the bigger picture of everything, when we look at the yoga perspective, in Kundalini Yoga, we always talk about being the sensory human being during these Aquarian energy times. We're moving through the age of Aquarius, and we are becoming more sensitive because we have to in order to survive. Think about how much energy in different forms of energy, whether it's information, whether it's through actions, whether it's through the way we exchange energy. Think about how much we have to process in one day compared to maybe 15 years ago. Or in our generation, whichever generation you're in, think about the generation before you and how they processed their energy or what information they were getting. We can see that everything is so much more faster, and this is going to continue happening, especially in the next 20 years. We're going to see a lot of these different transitions happening. And in order for us to connect with this, we have to become more sensitive and consciously sensitive about our energy. Again, whether you call yourself an empath or highly sensitive person becomes irrelevant here because we're all in the same boat. We're all learning how to manage our energy. And I did a free online webinar workshop. The link will be somewhere around this podcast or the description, so feel free to look at it. It's a 1 hour, 45-minute workshop talking more about the holistic approaches of the Aquarian age and how to adapt to this. So if you're interested in that, please check that out in the links connected to this. And I go into more detail about how we can manage our energy as empaths and highly sensitive people, as sensory beings, navigating these new waters, these new energies as we're becoming more sensitive. And all to say that this is actually a very progressive time. It's a challenging time, but it's also a very progressive time because once we take ownership of the fact that we are sensitive souls, we're able to use this energy efficiently. We're able to use energy management in order to manifest the things we want, in order to choose how we channel our energy, and in order to thrive. You know, it's about thriving. Many times, and I can see in my own life, you know, there are times where it does feel like a burden to be sensitive. It does feel like a weight on our shoulders to feel so much, to be in a place where we're connecting and exchanging so much energy. But in the long run, this is also a beautiful thing when we learn how to use it for progress in our life. And this is what this podcast series is all about. I want to share more of these tools. Yoga for Empaths is not just about yoga. Yoga lifestyle, holistic health is such a big topic in itself. I hope to include so many different things related to meditation and yoga, definitely, but also about energy healing and about how to use practical tools in our life related to holistic health and connecting to our soul on a deeper level. And of course, I always welcome feedback and comments and ideas. If you have certain topics that you want to explore more or you want to hear my opinion and my thoughts about, please feel free to do that. The next episode, we will be incorporating much more meditation and reflection. So I always invite listeners to bring tools that they love to use when it comes to reflection. So a journal, for example, a cup of tea, your yoga mat. Maybe do some meditation and yoga while you're listening to these podcasts, whatever feels right for you, but really creating these spaces where we can connect deeply into ourselves. And I hope that in the coming podcasts, some of you will find inspiration in the information and the things that also inspire me. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my first ever episode, and I'm so looking forward to jumping straight in our next episode and beyond, sharing the journey, thriving, loving, opening our heart, and being more connected to our energy. Have a beautiful day. Take care of yourselves. Satnam.